Great. I think we have some critical mass, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Terrific. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all with us today. Thank you for joining today's panel discussion on the experience of high school students during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Catherine Lusk, and I serve as the co-director of the Boston University Initiative on Cities. We are a hub for urban research, learning, and practice at Boston University. We have the pleasure of co-hosting today's discussion with the CERES Institute for Children and Youth at the BU Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. CERES leads applied research and evaluation to drive positive educational and life outcomes for children and youth. If you have questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A session following the preliminary discussion. Today's discussion is moderated by Dr. Jonathan Zaff. John is the director of the CERES Institute for Children and Youth and a research professor at BU Wheelock. John and all of the panelists, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you to all of the participants, and I will turn it over to you to get started. Thanks again.
Great, thanks so much, Catherine. Really excited to be here, and thank you all for coming and listening and learning with us on what is this crazy 60-degree day in Boston. So thank you for taking time in this late afternoon. So today we are joined by a number of, really privileged to have a number of panelists with us to really engage in a deep discussion about the experiences of young people during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just want to introduce them quickly and give you an idea about who they are. We'll then follow that with a presentation of the findings. That presentation will be done by Yasuko Kanno, who is an associate professor of language education and the chair of the Department of Language and Literacy Education at BU Wheelock. She's also a faculty fellow for CERES Institute, so which we're really deeply honored to have her. She's the lead researcher and really principal on this the Initiative on Cities funded research that we're going to highlight today, and really focus in on the experience of young people during the pandemic. We're also thrilled to be joined by Bethany Allen, who serves as the Director of Equitable Pathways in the Division of Equity Strategy and Opportunity Gaps at Boston Public Schools. In this role, she works to ensure all students have access to, understand, explore, and engage in equitable career, college, and life readiness opportunities, leading to student-driven choices that position them for success at the secondary level and beyond. So thank you, Bethany, and really excited to get to bring this idea of student-driven choices, because that's really at the heart of the work we're talking about today. We're also joined by Dr. Mary Jo Rendon, who serves as the retention specialist and a coordinator at the Waltham Opportunity Institute at Waltham High School. Dr. Rendon's work places parent engagement at the center for practice and spans most realms to support a highly diverse student population. And finally, but definitely not least, is we're joined by Eliana, who is a student at Greater Eggleston High School. And we're just thrilled that Eliana can be here to really, again, always bring us back to the student experience, the youth's experience, and that she'll be able to bring that perspective today. And so I'm thrilled at this point to turn it over to Dr. Kanno, who will present the research and really, which is, for us with the CERES Institute, so essential for us, which is always placing young people at the center of all the decisions that the collective we should be making. And so, Dr. Kanno, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. There you go. Thank you, John. My name is Yasuko Kanno, and I'm really delighted to be able to share the findings of this study. The title is "I Miss the Sound of Our Bells, Massachusetts High School Students Reflect on Life During the COVID-19 Pandemic." And we are also launching the report of this study. And I think Marisa is going to put in the link in the chat. So I hope you'll be able to have a look at that as well. And before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of the Mass Mentoring Partnership. We worked very closely with MMP while we were doing the data collection of this study, and especially the 5 Bank of America youth leaders listed on this slide are the youth researchers who did the bulk of the interviews that became the data for this study that we are going to share with you today. And also, these are the community-based organizations affiliated with an MMP, and they really helped us with the student recruitment, the students who participate in the study. So we are very, very grateful for their help. And we are also grateful to the Initiative on Cities for providing the seed grant, which made this study possible and running today's webinar. And thank you for being here. I know we are all zoomed out and really appreciate you participating in yet another webinar. I don't take that for granted, so thank you so much. So the rationale for this study was quite simple in that we really didn't find any studies that captured the voices of young people themselves, the high school students. There had been several really valuable and rigorous large-scale studies, statistical analysis, survey data that provided the bird's eye view of the impact of COVID-19 on K-12 students in the United States, especially academic performance and also mental health issues. But we really didn't find any studies that actually asked students what they're going through and what their lived experiences were like. And we thought that if we were to support these students effectively as they go through the rest of the pandemic and hopefully, past the pandemic, then we really first needed to know what their experiences were like. So that's what we set out to do. We set out to capture the lived experiences of young people in and around Boston, really throughout Massachusetts during the first 1.5 years of the pandemic. So I want to start out by sharing DeMarcus's story. DeMarcus was one of the students we interviewed, and he's a Latino student who was attending a public school outside of Boston. And before the pandemic, he was a really high academic achiever. But then when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, his parents lost their jobs. So he and his brother had to start working and work long hours in order to support the family. And so what he did was essentially he pretended to be on, participating in school via Zoom while he was actually at work. So he said, my teachers didn't know that I was missing class because I would just have it being the Zoom class, on my phone, and I've had the volume off, and I would leave the Zoom meeting playing while I was at work. So it's this kind of story that the student shared with us. So what we did was last summer, so this study took place last summer between July and September, early September, and through the support of MMP and the community-based organizations, we managed to get in touch with 62 students throughout Massachusetts. Most of them were in greater Boston area, and all the interviews took place on Zoom. And we had a pretty wide range of race and ethnic backgrounds, also the age range. These were all students who were in high school during the previous year. And in terms of the gender, the grade levels and also geographic representation, we had a pretty wide range. So while we don't really claim any we don't make any claims to generalizability because this is a convenient sample. We are also confident that we actually captured a fairly wide range of experiences. So I only have about 10 minutes to talk about the findings. So I'm just going to give you some highlights, and I really hope that you take the time to actually look at the report. So the first one, the very, very salient theme that emerged was that remote learning was very, very difficult. So remote learning was difficult because of all the distractions at home while you were, zooming in to your classes. So Apple said my attention span of since there's my phone out there, my gaming console, it was really hard to not just stop distracting myself. Remote learning was hard for those students who entered high school for the first time as ninth graders and went straight into remote learning. I mean, can you imagine going to high school for the first time and you don't know anybody and you start remotely? I mean, that's got to be hard. So Sony said, I didn't really know anybody, especially because it was all virtual. Most kids didn't want to turn on their cameras or even speak up during the school year. So I just knew a whole bunch of names. And also we were struck by how many students, made a distinction between keeping up with grades and the real learning. And so Smith said, definitely, to a certain extent, I was able to complete most of my work, but academically, from learning, I wasn't able to take back too much from the year. And so many students said that, technically they were able to keep up with grades, but they really didn't learn as much as they should have. Another salient theme, really sort of striking theme that emerged was the illness and death touched these students and families. So again, these are 15 to 20 years old, basically they're really young people, that's the healthiest phase of your life. And so this is a time of your life that normally you really shouldn't have to think about illness and death on a daily basis, but some of the students did because of COVID. So of the 62 students, 15 students had direct experience with COVID-19. 2 students contracted COVID themselves. 5 of them had family members, especially their grandparents, pass away because of COVID. And then 8 students had family members who contracted COVID and got sick. So Nini, who was already struggling with mental health issues, shared that it was really hard to see her grandmother suffer because of COVID. She said, during the time I was around my grandmother when she had COVID, and it was very hard to see because we didn't think it was that serious and we knew it affected elderly people, but she couldn't walk, she couldn't use the bathroom, and she couldn't breathe correctly. So we just had to send her to the hospital and pray that she'd be okay. So it's this kind of, the struggle with COVID-19 and then illness and then death touching the families that we heard a lot of. And speaking of mental health, I think in the media and then among ourselves, we talk a lot about the toll that COVID has taken on young people and frankly on ourselves as well. And the issue of mental health came up in our data as well. So about a third of the students we interviewed, 21 students, reported struggling with mental health, whether that's anxiety, trauma responses. These are students' own words, by the way, fatigue, stress, depression, a sense of being overwhelmed. Some of the mental health struggles came directly from remote learning and the monotony of it and the sedentary lifestyle that came from remote learning. Like Mark said, I get on my computer and then just sit there in the morning or just lie on the bed while the teacher is talking. Repeating the cycle was harmful to my mental health and physical health. And Victoria said, I felt very emotional, like a roller coaster. And I think many of us can really relate to that. And while some of the students, struggle with mental health, but then, they were eventually basically okay, they were able to get on with their life. But some students had a really, really severe mental health crisis, like Jamie. They said, I literally could not get out of bed in the morning because of depression, and the anxiety hit hard. So when I was at school, I couldn't function at all. I told my teachers like I was struggling. And then they told the guidance counselor who convinced health services people to come to my house. And then they basically saved my life. So some students had serious crisis during COVID. Another theme that emerged that was kind of unexpected in an interesting way, was that the students' networks of support shifted, but shifted in a sort of interesting way. So many of the students, because they stopped going to school in person, and they said that they weren't sort of going to school and therefore they weren't bumping into their peers casually. So they said that their casual network of casual peers, the network of casual peers narrowed and shrunk. But they also said, the core friendship groups, the best friends that they had, the friendship actually deepened and solidified, because they took the time to connect with each other and make sure that they, take care of each other. So like Penny said, it's like, it sounds strange, but I feel like in some way we got closer during the pandemic than we normally were, because I guess we were home. So we're just talking most like every day. Yeah, we like started to miss each other more and more. So I just feel like our bond grew closer. So this was, one of the positive findings of, amid all the fairly dark themes that we found. And then, we did these interviews last summer when the COVID infection rates were sort of going down, and everybody had a sort of fairly positive outlook on what September could look like. And so many students were really longing to go back to school in person, and were really looking forward to going back. But then several students also expressed, strong fear of going back. They thought of going back to school in September as a health risk. So Lisa shared, honestly, I miss the sound of our bells, hence the title, like telling us to go to class, even though I hated it when I was there, I would do anything to have it back again. And on the other hand, AK said, rather darkly, what I'm worried about is my school. It's physically not a big school, 1,700 people in a building that has basically no ventilation. I think they're waiting till somebody dies before they close stuff down. So some young people were actually almost angry that adults weren't taking more proactive measures to make schools safer. And lastly, I want to say a few words about this notion of learning loss. There's been a lot of media reports about, how this generation of students suffered a major major and irreparable learning loss. And the students we interviewed will be the first ones to acknowledge that they did experience a major learning loss. However, that does not mean that their learning stopped completely. If you think about education in a broad sense of the word, like education in life, they certainly learned very, very important life lessons. And they shared with us, really wide words. Some students learned about their own strength and resilience, like Tina, who said, I definitely learned about strengths. You learn a lot from yourself, just kind of standing there in isolation. And complement to that, some students said, it's important to learn your own strengths, but also important to learn your own limits and when to reach out for help. So Rain said, you have to know how much you can do and just know when to ask for help as well. And the AK said, like this sort of ephemeral nature of life, how things can go away quickly. So you should really appreciate the life you are given. So he said, your life can change so quickly by something that you weren't even a part of. And another students learned really through experience that their actions have consequences on others. Maria said, you can't really afford to be selfish because you might not get the virus and die because you're young, but you could give it to somebody else and that could spread it, and that could eventually kill other people. So it's like taking care of yourself, but also other people. So the point is that, these are really important life lessons. And I think, any of us could really use some of these lessons. And these students, because of COVID, learned these lessons the hard way, but they learned them well. So I think that's it. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to hear what the panelists have to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Yasuko. And I'll ask all the panelists just to put on your cameras and to unmute yourselves, or at least put on your cameras for now. Thank you. So I just want to, one thing just to reflect for a second as sort of a segue into the questions is, I saw in the Q&A that there was a comment made about sort of appreciating the approach that was taken here, that, this deeply qualitative and approach to get at the deep lived experiences of young people during the pandemic. And just to note that the reason why we took this approach really came from hearing from the community. We really heard from many of you, I think, who are here today, when we started out by saying, would a survey be, another survey be helpful? We could ask different questions. And we heard very strongly, please don't do that. We're not learning more from those surveys. What we need to learn is a deeper story. And so that really drove this approach. To that point, I would love to, pose to the panel to start with, and maybe Bethany, I'll start with you, is really just to ask, in reflecting on the findings that were presented by Yasuko just now, but also just what you've seen in the fuller report, what really stuck out to you, that you hadn't learned before, that really was meaningful, and I think sort of moves us in a different direction in our actions?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you all for inviting me to be here today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to reflect on this really wonderful study and report. And I think the first thing that I would say is that I really was struck by the depth and the openness and just how much young people shared about their lives and the way they experienced school and COVID. Just to your point that you just raised, John, about the sort of, getting to more depth than just, what you might get in a survey. These young people really opened up their lives and talked about, things that were deeply meaningful and personal to them. And I'm really grateful for all that they shared. The thing that sort of overarchingly I took away from this report is that we need to keep questioning and disrupting some common narratives that exist around young folks, not just in terms of, education, but in terms of who they are. I loved that you all really clearly stated that, these young folks were not sort of self-absorbed and thinking of themselves as invincible, but again, they demonstrated that they cared deeply for their families, for their friends, for their communities, and that was really powerful. I think also in terms of I think that got me started thinking about what are the other narratives that this report might disrupt for some folks. And one thing that actually I thought of for the first time when reading this report was, we talk a lot about young folks who took on caregiving responsibilities as a result of the pandemic, taking on responsibility for younger siblings or older family members. And one of the things I realized is that we don't often have in that same conversation where we talk about that as a barrier or something that took away from young people being able to engage in school, that they live in intergenerational households, which are themselves really rich sources for education and learning and growth and relationship and care. And so again, thinking about how we can have a conversation about, yes, this was hard and at best unfair for young people to have to take on these additional responsibilities and still live up to the academic and educational expectations that we set for them. At best, it's unfair. At worst, it's racist and classist. But let's think about how we can also talk about again what are the strengths, what are the things that can be gained, what are the alternative ways of knowing and learning that happen in intergenerational households. So I think, again, for me, there were just many places where this report just helped me think about how can we flip the script a little bit and disrupt some common narratives that we have about young people and their families and communities.
Thank you for that. Those sort of powerful statements about, again, centering young people's, authentic experience and not just what we believe, we meaning adults believe their experiences to be. And so let me ask Eliana, turn to you, sort of reflecting both on the report, but also on what Bethany has sort of said. So you're coming at it from, from kind of our target audience here, the people who are experiencing it every day. And, you've been sort of in the midst of this now for a good chunk of your high school career as a senior in high school. And what are your reflections, both as now a senior in high school, both on your experiences, but also on just what you've seen your friends and your peers experience?
I feel like the report had some pretty accurate information because I've seen it among my peers. My experience for me was very hard because I went from being like an A and B student to like failing and having C's because I didn't have the support I used to have in school. I used to ask the teachers for help and they wouldn't get back to me. Like we was all learning how to use the Zoom. And there was another app, I think it was called like Remind, where you could like text the teachers and we would try to communicate and they still wouldn't get back to us. So what me and my peers did, we would just try to help each other as much as we can. And that's how we would like push ourselves. But I'm only friends with I lost a lot of friends during COVID. I'm only friends with like a couple of them, but yeah.
No, thank you for sharing and, for, just your openness to, courage to share that. Cause I think that's, it's so, obviously we heard as well. And just, what we experience every day with so many young people is this shrinking of their friend network and looking for the support around them. But also inspiring to hear as you're talking about the fact that you were able to lean on each other. And I think that speaks to what I think Beth and Yasuko were saying about the strength that you all are showing during this such difficult times, that you can count on each other. And that's, I think, a powerful statement for you to make. So thank you for that. I want to get Mary Jo in the conversation, because I know she's, working with a lot of young people who are dealing with a lot of significant situations in their lives, that you're describing, Eliana. And so we'd love to, Mary Jo, get your reflection on the findings and again, just what you're hearing also from the other panelists.
Yes, so John, thank you for this opportunity for being here. And Dr. Kanno, congratulations on this excellent report. Absolutely, I totally agree with Eliana. I think she epitomizes what I hear and what I've been seeing and working with my students as well. I'm impressed at this, how awareness has just been elevated because of this pandemic. And it's a global awareness. So it's not just pockets here and there, it is really transnational. And I think when we look at these relationships that have deepened, it's not just within the home, but the home is also, geographies and those levels of communication, of sharing, of empathy, of also of self-reflection. And I think it comes out in the report of this idea of, hey, there's a lot of flexibility during COVID. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can have my camera on, or I can have it off. And students appreciated that, yet they're reflecting by saying, because of this flexibility, are teachers really lowering their standards for me? And if so, what does that really mean for me? How much am I really learning? And am I really learning everything I ought to be learning at this point in time? So I think that level of critique also reflects a level of maturity on all of our students that I'm very, very impressed with, and I think comes out in this report as well, which is something that helps us as educators to also look deeply into our own practice as well.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think what's sort of notable when I hear all of you kind of answering the question is this through line of strength and possibility, which I think, Yasuko, to your point, it's that that's this key thing that's been missing from that narrative. And Yasuko, I just want to give you a chance. Just I know you presented on the findings, but as you reflect also just on what you're hearing from the panelists as well, what really for you was that aha part of this project?
a good question. I was really sort of like, before we started this, there were a lot of sort of fairly simplistic narratives, of the kinds that the Bethany mentioned at the beginning, like these, young people are invincible, therefore not really afraid of COVID. They would really, act selfishly. They wouldn't be wearing masks, they wouldn't care. And also, there was a lot of sort of like, oh, yeah, remote learning isn't working, and then some of people, obviously, as report said, said that, but there were always sort of like, counter narrative, if you like. So although many people said that, remote learning wasn't working, but there were a small number of students who said, especially those who are commuting long hours, right? Like, I mean, some students were spending an hour and a half each way to get to their school. They said, like that remote learning basically saves 2 hours each day, and that's a big deal. And I can sleep in, I can catch up on my sleep, I can actually develop hobbies, I can work. And so some students did really sort of appreciate it, remote learning. And the same sort of dichotomy of, as I mentioned, students sort of really wanting to go back, but then were sort of afraid because they were afraid that maybe their social skills atrophied, and then they weren't sort of used to seeing hundreds of people all at once. So would I be able to cope with that? So there are always sort of like dichotomies or like different narratives going on, and then sort of the complexities of that were really interesting to witness. And what Mary Jo said about that the level of reflection that these students had. I mean, these are pretty short interviews. On average, it was like 15 minutes. But some students had really, really profound things to say, and I think that's why I love talking to high school students. They sound like kids one moment, but the next moment they share such really, really profound, unique thoughts. So that was really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think, as you're saying, these are things that we're hearing, over the summer when these interviews were conducted, and hearing again these counter narratives so often, and both as their experiences were, getting ready to be transformed as the fall was approaching, and there was this kind of thought of, okay, what's next? And I kind of want to get a little bit into this, what's next, because. And Eliana, maybe to turn to you for a moment, if you don't mind, to ask, what's this year been like? And again, both based you as a person in it, but also you kind of with an eye as a researcher to say, what have I been seeing with my peers in the school that our findings were really based on interviews we conducted before people really came back fully. And so would be curious just to hear your reflections on what this year has been like.
I switched schools, so I was at a different school where I didn't have support, and I came to this school where I'm at now, and I feel like I have all the support I need, and I'm graduating on time. So I will be graduating in June. I'm very proud of that. I've seen like a lot of my peers not come into class, and it was sad. It was sad, but I'm like telling them, come to school. They're coming, and I'm helping them. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I again, thank you for your honesty in that. And I think it's, I think, as we were hearing over the summer that there was this reticence to come back, what is this going to be like? One, it just from a safety perspective, will I be safe in the building? And then also that recognition of like, there are other things happening in life that were there before the pandemic started, but got amplified during the pandemic. And so now I'm getting stretched in different ways that I never imagined. And so, I think your friends are lucky to have a person like you in their lives, I think is clear, who can be there for them. And I'm curious, Mary Jo, from, the young people you're working with as well, that, or what have you seen as so many people have transitioned back in and are trying to kind of recalibrate about what life is supposed to be like?
Again, going back to Eliana, congratulations. That's a huge achievement. I'm very proud of you. It's fabulous. And that's my challenge. Eliana's my goal, having students graduate on time. And students are not graduating on time that I work with. So what I see is, yes, what does that really look like? And why is that looking that way? And what are our schools doing? And how are we supporting and meeting students where they're at and understanding these needs? So it really does have us take a step back to listen better, to observe, to understand these new realities that are within our structures also. And that in itself too is a disruptive narrative, right? These new realities, because our system is not designed, nor is it built for the complexity of the lives of our youth today. And so we need to hear student voice. We need to understand what is the level of engagement and disengagement so that the attendance rate does improve, because attendance is our biggest challenge right now with all of our students. And that attendance is puzzling, it's challenging, and it really brings the whole school building together to think creatively and analytically to understand where are our students, how can we support them, and how are we going to engage with the people around our students to build those supports for our students.
Thank you, and thank you also for the congratulations for Eliana, because she does deserve it. I think you probably got about 50 or 60 people in the audience who are probably also congratulating you, and we just don't have. I think when in this webinar way, you don't have the button where you get the little sort of celebratory thing. So just know it's there, because I think it is just impressive, and I think because of what as Mary Jo references about what people are going through and the difficulties so many people are understandably having during this transition back. And Bethany, when you think of it through the lens you have from your perch kind of within BPS or around issues of equity, and you think through, and I know you experience, we've had many conversations about this, about what young people in Boston are experiencing and how best to support them. What comes to mind for you upon reflection about what can be done to meet young people where they are?
Yeah, I think a couple of things are coming up for me around that. And one is, as Mary Jo was saying, yes, we need to continue to listen and give young people platforms to tell us what they need. And I think one of the things that where we get challenged is we often create these forums, not often enough, but we create forums where we solicit feedback from young people or input from young people. And then there's a lack of change or a lack of follow through. This is something that it's just, really crushing to trust building among young people. If you ask them their opinion or ask them, what they want or need, and then they never hear from you again, you've lost them. And so I think, we really need to examine the ways in which we are following up and following through on things that young people are telling us that they want and need. And not just the things that we think they want and need that they affirm for us, but the things that they tell us they want and need that might be a little harder or more challenging to do. We have to give it, an honest try, right, to respond to those needs and figure out if there's a way to do it, right? And then the other thing that I just wanted to say as I'm thinking about, Eliana, congratulations also for me. And
thank you.
Yes, and one of the things that is so powerful about what you've said both times you've spoken is that you and other your other students, co-students help each other and have really been trying to help each other through this really extraordinarily challenging time, and that that is in and of itself a beautiful concept, a beautiful idea. And it also it's really elevating this another idea that I got from the report, which is that, we often sort of dismiss the humanity of our young people, right? And as we were talking before about the sort of the profoundness of some of the reflections of young people, the depth, the care, the level of care that young people were giving and sharing about their families and their friends. It just really struck me that these are all experiences that, you know, many of us can relate to. And it really struck me that what is actually on display here is just the full, beautiful humanity of our young people. And we often overlook that, we often dismiss it. And I think, you know, we need to also, as we're opening these forums or channels for young people to tell us what it is that they want and need, that we start with, we're recognizing young people in their full humanity.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And I, you know, just not to bring up, you know, individual conversations we've had, but I just, you know, because I think you've said it so beautifully before also around, you know, schools of that value belonging, this idea where you can bring your full self and your authentic full self to the school with a level of trust that you're accepted for that full self. And I think that's just a beautiful sentiment, and, you know, and something I think we'd all aspire to for our schools. And I think with that sentiment, you know, Eliana, you know, saw in the Q&A that there's kind of two questions that I think go together that maybe you're best positioned to answer, and which is, you know, when you think about being at Greater Eggleston, and you think about the supports that if you could, you know, wave your magic wand that would be there, you know, what would you say? And that there's another question that was asked about, you know, what recommendation or what suggestions would you give to a new teacher coming in or a teacher in training? And so would love your reflections on, you know, both what kind of supports you think are needed in your school that maybe aren't there, or ones that you would like to lift up because they are there, but also if there's a new teacher coming in, what kind of guidance would you give them?
What would I say about the school?
Yeah.
It's a small school, so like everybody's like together. The teachers, I didn't know any of the teachers here. I didn't know none of the students here. The teachers really like pushed me to do my work, come to class. And me coming here, I had like class in person, but I also would have class online. So that's what really helped me be able to graduate on time. And for the new teachers and the old teachers, I just feel like you guys should just explain your experience with the kids and like ask them why they're not coming to school, see if you can help them out. Try to make a way so they feel like you're supporting them and they can come to you if they need help. And if anything's going on at home, they'll let you know. And yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, again, because I think, you know, what you're describing is this, you know, really kind of powerful notion of just, you know, what Bethany, you just talked about, which is, you know, the humanity of it, you know, that, you know, we see each other as full humans, and how do we get to know each other on a deeper level and appreciate who we are. And when somebody's in need, you know, whether, as you're saying, you know, when friends come to you and they're in need, you're there to help them because you're there, you know, in this way, full humanity. And, you know, what can we have, you know, can we have our teachers do the same, you know, when they come? Mary Jo, I see your hand up. Would love your thoughts.
Yeah, so I am very much intrigued also by what Bethany and Eliana are saying. And it's also reflected in the report, right? This need for coordinated support systems or coordinated programs, and how these adults come to provide those supports for our students so that they become that trusted adult, so that those relationships of trust are actually developing. And my question, I'd like to ask Eliana the question about that coordinated support. You're saying, my teachers pushed me. I was doing a blended learning. I was online, but I was also in school. And I'm wondering if you can just elaborate on that a little bit more. Who are these adults that are pushing you? How are they pushing you? And what was that relationship online and in person for you to be successful?
Can I say names? Okay, so my anatomy teacher, Ms. Garcia, Ms. Brew, she's my advisor, and Ms. Gill, who she wasn't my advisor, but she was my friend's advisor, and Ms. Noble. So I would come to the school, do my class, do my work. If I finished early or during advisory, I would do my online class, which was, I had Spanish. I had 2 classes on online, and I finished those, and like, it took me a while, but I finished them, and they gave me a deadline to like push me to do it. They were asking me all the time, like, oh, how are you doing on the online class? And they could see my progress and see where I'm at, if I'm almost done. And I would show them, and I finished both of my classes, I believe it was December. So now I just have 3 classes, and I just come in person for those. For the other students, they do the same thing. Some other students have more classes online than I did. Some of them have like 4 if they really want to graduate in June, or they'll like end up graduating in August if they're like missing more than 4 credits. And some of them already graduated like last week, and 2 of my friends were one of them.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
John, can I just chime in?
Yeah, please do.
So what Eliana said resonates with what we've been hearing. We're actually doing a follow-up study of this initial survey interviews, and we are interviewing 9 of the 62 students from the original interviews, and these are the students who who really had struggles, of various kinds, so who tended not to be attending in a school on a regular basis. And the 2 of the students are attending maybe school that sounds right similar to the school Eliana is attending, in that, there is a flexible schedule, there's an online component, and there's an in-person component. The teachers are there more like really to support individualized learning. And then there is, Saturday school, Sunday school, if necessary, students can come in. On Sundays, if they need it to, they don't have to come in, they could be online. And then for students who really sort of disengaged from school during the pandemic for a variety of reasons, especially those students who were suffering from really severe mental health issues, this sort of really flexible schedule and individualized support is really essentially alternative form of schooling. Not you attend from the set time 7:30 to 2:30 because that's what your school does, really seems to be what is really helping. And another thing that I do want to say, sort of going back to Bethany's point about sort of trusted relationship. There is a section in the report, that's sort of like a separate section because only a few students talked about it, but, the issues of racism. Some students really experience racism and discrimination. And they took, some of them took the matter to school and really reported it, and then really wanted the schools to do something about it. And they really did not get any satisfactory response from adults. And that was a huge disappointment to them. So this notion of, you go and take action and speak up, only to see your school really not responding in any adequate way. So that was a striking finding too.
And it's very striking, and it's very real, right? I think this idea of, again, the awareness, the maturity of our students who are very aware of their societies and what is happening in their worlds. They're not divorcing themselves from those realities when coming to school. And that's that disruptive narrative that they are bringing, and which challenges us, again, the educators, right? How in tune are we with these new realities and these new worldviews of our students? And I think it's extremely challenging for us.
No, I mean, I appreciate your honesty there. I mean, sometimes it's, hard to speak up in the role you're in and say, we're having some, this is hard. This is hard work for us. And, we're struggling through and really working toward it. Bethany, I know, I'm guessing I saw your hand before, so I wanted to make sure we get to you with some reflections as well.
Yeah, I wanted to respond. And then Mary Jo said something that really, I think was getting at the same thing that I was thinking about, which is that, we often, again, create spaces or encourage young people to be advocates for themselves. This is a skill, a life skill that will serve them well in their futures. And yet we often respond to youth advocacy by silencing them, in some cases punishing young people who speak up or who challenge rules or things that aren't serving them in school. So I think, yes, we need to think about, how we as adults respond to youth advocacy and what messages we send to young people with that response. One message, I think, as a young person myself who was deeply invested in youth advocacy, when I got pushback from adults in my community, the message I received and internalized is that your opinion doesn't matter. You actually don't deserve these things that you're asking for, so you should just be quiet. And so I think, we need to really spend some time thinking about what are the unintentional messages that we send to young people when we either give them the space to be advocates and then ignore them, or don't give them that space at all. And think about what are we saying about, what we want for young people for their future, if we're kind of squelching their capacity to advocate for themselves at such a young age. And then the other thing I just, I think, the other thing that I wanted to mention is that, Yasuko brought up this sort of the fact that, some young people, and this is in the report, that some young people really knew who the folks were to go to get help and to get support. They really had an understanding of, who the adults were in their community that had their backs. And then there were some cases where young people spoke up and they felt that, they were ignored or silenced. And I think that, that both of those realities are important for us to reflect on in terms of, again, what are the messages that we're sending to young people, and that, young people, again, we have a narrative about young people as not really understanding certain concepts like networking, right? Or we have to teach young people how to network. And I think it's very clear that young people, they might not call it that, or they might not have that language, but they do know the story in the report about the student who got some financial help. That was really powerful for me in a couple of ways. One, because they knew who to go to for help, and because they received direct aid, which is another thing that we're often resistant to do. And sometimes that's what's needed to respond to these systemic challenges that young people are facing. So I just wanted to raise both of those points as things that really were standing out for me in the report as well.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate this. It's sort of the mindsets that we bring as adults into our school buildings and just into our communities, as you say. With that's CERES Institute, we talk about a positive youth development mindset. So is like, do we as adults come in and our orientation toward the young people with whom we're working and partnering and learning with, are they, is it that we're working together as true partners and seeing the strength in each other and wanting to create empowering moments for each other? And then the other point you bring up around, being able to find people who can support you, but maybe not having the structures in place, formal structures. There's a question actually in the Q&A for Eliana, directed for you. But we only have a few minutes left, but would love your thoughts, and then also the other panelists afterward to get your thoughts on this too, which is around mental health supports within schools, and what you see with Greater Eggleston, or what you see with your friends and the needs you see there. We see in our report that that there definitely, mental health needs were definitely present there. We also have seen the Surgeon General's report talking about this nationally. And so, I think there's a curiosity to hear from you, Eliana, about what you're seeing as actual, formal supports that are there. But then again, we'd also love to hear from others about your experiences working at the level of the support system.
My school has 3 social workers or counselors, guidance counselor, whatever you want to call them. I see one of them. I see her every Thursday. So You can make appointments with them to see them, or you could just stop by their office. Their door is always open. You can always stop by. You could sit there if you need like a break or something. They also, if you need the support and like need them to go to an appointment with you, or like if you have court or whatever it may be, you need somebody to be there with you, they'll go. Even the teachers, if you ask, the teachers are very helpful too. And so are the students. Like, I didn't know most of these students, but now I know everybody, and everybody's friends with each other. And that's really good. Like, no drama, no nothing. Everybody's chill. Everybody helps each other. And I really like that.
No, that's not, I mean, the way you describe it is like it's a community. It's a real community that knows each other and looks out for each other. And sounds like then, you know, if you have a need, somebody's there to help you out. And also you can help somebody else out because you know that they have a need as well. Yeah. And you'd mentioned that Greater Eggleston's a pretty small school. So do you feel like that helps with that? Yeah. And again, we only have a few minutes, but just, if others have sort of short sort of reflections on this question of the structures in place to support students who might have needs, would love to give you an opportunity to reflect.
I know in my school, we're building community circles and training our staff in community circles. We also have social workers and school adjustment counselors who are doing an excellent job, as Ileana was describing, very similar to that. And then cultural brokers as well to help in terms of the cultural differences, linguistic access into also the different programming. So yeah, there's a lot, and it's a very important factor, piece of our work.
Yeah, similarly, the district made a big investment around social workers. It's great to hear you have several at your school, Eliana. Social workers, we are also moving towards increasing our numbers of guidance counselors. We have a lot of work, restorative justice programming that's happening, and we're trying to grow that. And I'm also involved in a few mentorship programs. And we're exploring different models for mentorship. Right now, it's mostly BPS staff who are mentoring young people, often in their school, but not always in their school. And we're thinking about creating a model. We're working on creating a model for some peer mentorship district-wide. Some schools already do this within their school communities, but we're working on a district-wide model for that as well. And the one thing I just would like to say is that, all of the good things that are happening, there are a lot of good things happening, and we still need more. And I think I just want to encourage folks that, even if the interventions are seemingly not helping, not making enough of a difference, we're still seeing a lot of folks that really need a lot of support with mental health issues. It's not too late to start. It's never too late for us to really start focusing on this relationship building, focusing on really centering young people, focusing on elevating the humanity of our young people in all of the work that we do. Start where you are and really go from there. But I think it's not too late. We have to keep giving our best and showing up for young people.
No, thank you. And I think, we're about to wrap up on time, and really appreciate everybody being with us today. And as I'm going to do a few thank yous just for the panelists, just because I'm going to ask you one, just to answer in a short question in a moment, just so you have a chance to think about it, which is, as we're sort of leaving today and going back to our lives, if you had one sort of piece of advice to, again, that school leader, that person who's going to be there to support a young person, like what would you want them to walk away with, like that one piece of information that you think is so important for them to know? So think about that for a second. But really just, again, thank you everyone for coming. I want to just a huge thank you to our panelists, especially Eliana, because I know as a student, you've been through a long day as it is, and then to stay with us, is deeply appreciated, especially during the stresses of a school week. Thankfully, you get a nice vacation next week, so I hope you get a time to just relax and take care of yourself and your family. And again, You can find the report. Marissa had put the link in the chat, so please look there for the full report and to learn more about the CERES Institute and the work we're doing. And with that, let me turn back to our panelists and maybe we go Yasuko, Bethany, Mary Jo, and then Eliana. You can be our, sort of send us off with just that nugget of advice you'd give somebody about what should they be thinking about in supporting our young people.
I'll start. Thank you, John, so much for moderating the conversation here. So I think one thing I really learned was that don't assume anything. When for example, when students stop coming to school or they're not doing the work, or don't assume that they are not motivated or they're lazy, or there are often reasons why they're not doing what schools think they should be doing. And I take that to my own teaching too. And then so like I remind myself when one of my students is late for with the assignments, or they seem to be distracted and not doing work, rather than assuming, oh, she's not interested or she's not motivated, I remind myself to reach out and say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, right, to really understand who we are as people and not to assume things. Bethany, over to you.
Yeah, I think my comments are very similar, Yasuko. I think, no assumptions. And also, I think young people are really, really hungry to be seen. And I think we need as adults to think about what kinds of spaces that we are cultivating for young people so that they can bring their authentic self. My son had shared with me the year after he graduated from high school, he was talking about his experience there. And he said, the school didn't make me who I am, but it was a place where other people saw me the way I saw myself. And that's one way of defining freedom. So I think, thinking about the spaces that we create for young people, how can we create spaces where young people can be seen the way they see themselves?
Mary Jo.
Yeah, and similarly, in creating those new spaces, how are we defining and understanding that whole child through their aspirations and affirming their contributions, not only in school, but beyond the school, because they are young adults and they are performing both in and out of our schools. So affirming that asset that they actually possess and understanding how their cultures work with our cultures as well.
Their full lives about who they are. Yeah. Eliana, so, we'll end with you, but just your thoughts on, again, if you had that one piece of advice to give about how to best support you and your peers and everybody else throughout, throughout the country, what would you say?
First, I want to say that I agree with what Bethany's son said. That the school was a place where they could see him for who he was. For the school and the teachers, see the kids for who they are, make a space where they can come to you and feel comfortable and be comfortable with them. Don't assume, because then the students are not going to come to you, going to come to your class, and then you're going to be upset. So I just feel like, don't assume, be there for them. Be who you are, your true self, so they can be their true selves with you.
No, thank you. I think that's brilliant advice. And I think nothing more needs to be said to leave us, I think, for today. And so I just want to, again, thank our panelists. Eliana, thank you for those sage, wise words throughout this time. But, thank you to Bethany, to Mary Jo, to Yasuko, and to all of you for being here with us. And, hope you are all stay well and safe and get a chance to enjoy this warm but soon to be rainy weather in the Boston area.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eliana. Congratulations